Alright guys, today I'm here to talk to you about the secret history living inside of your aquarium. Today we're going to talk about the history and the care info for taking care of Nerite snails. So they're kind of a cool snail in that they're kind of like a monoshrimp and various other snails where they will not reproduce in fresh water. So they may come to the top of your tank. Here's one here. It's got kind of interesting dotted patterns. There's also some with zebra patterns. I only have a couple in each tank because you really don't need a ton in each tank. One goes a long ways, and then you got to feed them. But they will work very well. I've also got a Siamese algae eater in this tank, and that is to take care of some of the softer green algae. But back to the Nerites. So the Nerites, I got these from Tampa Aquaculture, tampaaquaculture.com. He'll hook you guys up with a little something extra if you mention my name. But he's got a whole bunch of snails right now that he just got in. And so I was kind of tired of pond snails taking over everything. So I've been working on reducing some of the bladder snails, pond snails. And I've been kind of sticking with these Nerite snails because they're a little larger, so they're easier to keep track of. Now, that means that they don't get into the crevices like some of the other snails, but with shrimp in the tank and things like that, you don't necessarily need, if you have the right combination of cleaning crew, you don't need all of that. So, yeah, here is the Nerite snail. Now, the Nerite snail, scientifically speaking, let's walk over to the other tank real quick, because I've also got some horned Nerite snails that are hanging out in public here, and a striped one, a zebra striped one, that is hanging out somewhere around here. But for here, these are young horned Nerite snails, and you can see it's on the rock. They're not known to be like black-beard algae eaters, but they definitely do disturb it, and you can see this rock. You can see where that snail has been in the last day. He's been hanging out on that rock, and you can see how clean some surfaces of it are compared to like the other rocks. They're just not, and he is just, or she, it, is just munching away and cleaning up all the way down to the rock surface that crud and that algae. Now, strategically, you may want some algae. Like some people may like this look. For me, I've got a cleanup crew of shrimp to eat detritus on the ground and floating algae and things, floating, I don't know, protista. And then I've also got these, I've got Siamese algae eater. I've got one of them in here. So he'll work on the red algae and some of the stringier algae, the hair algae and things like that a little bit more. Blackbeard's a little tougher, but you can always put hydrogen peroxide on that and then other fish will eat it. We've also got the Pleco, and the Pleco is not a great algae eater. They do eat algae, but that's not what they're like known to do. Only certain species of them do that. Now, you can see the Siamese algae eater is actually ripping at the blackbeard algae that is growing from the rock. And so that's awesome. But the downside is they get larger and they get territorial if you have more than one. I recommend an autosynclus hanging out there. If you need something to just keep your glass clean, like a combination of autosynclus and some snails does wonders. You can get a Pleco of certain sorts, like a rubber lip Pleco or rubber mouth Pleco, but you know, they're only so effective, and you want things that can get under each little leaf, and that's where like a mono shrimp or even Neocaridina shrimp, any sort of shrimp, are going to help pick at the little teeny bits of things. So essentially, I just wanted to show you guys these horned ones and the other ones. The beautiful swirled zebra one that Tampa Aquaculture sent me at a great price too is nowhere to be found at the moment. I guess he hit the deck. he heard I was making a video and wants to make my life miserable. So let's go into the history and the care of these critters. So in the Nerite snail world, Nerite natalensis, which is named after KwaZulu-Natal in southern Africa, which is its own kingdom, run by Zulu warriors, and since the time of the Boer Wars, if you know your South African history, which I'm guessing a lot of people don't, but that's okay. So they, when you're looking to buy them, if you're at a pet store, the best way to look for them is you want to make sure that nothing's growing on them and they don't have clear spots in their shells. The other big, like, no-no, obviously, is if they're upside down. If they're upside down, they're probably dead. They have a very hard time flipping over, and unless someone comes and rescues them, they can sometimes get stuck upside down, especially full-grown ones. The younger ones can kind of prop themselves up like these two. The older ones, I've dropped in a tank before and noticed that they got to the bottom, they're upside down, and they can't get themselves upright, and dinner time rolls around and I have to flip them upright. So an aquascape like this can be dangerous because they can kind of get startled or wedged between spots, and they're not the most graceful at getting out of them. So just be aware of that. But they're still great little tank companions. The other limiting factors of these snails is that they want water that's 70 to 80 degrees, and ideally it should be about 72 to 76 degrees, and they won't reproduce in your tank, which is nice. They're brackish water reproducers, but they do want that water temperature to replicate the African countries that they come from, living in streams and lakes and rivers, and they also do like to have some moderate flow, so I keep my flow lengthwise in this tank just so that there's a little more flow. And I'm just going to let you guys look at the other fish, because the snails, I mean, I can only show you so much of snails. You can Google pictures of all the variations. There are some beautiful Nerite snails, and I have some of them, but they're hiding, so sorry that that's not more helpful in this video. But they are doing a great job of cleaning up my aquascape. You can see they've already cleaned off the face of one rock and moved on to another. And it will just be an ongoing cycle. If they ever clean too much, you need to be careful and make sure you have food on hand, like algae wafers or some sort of supplement for them. Same with the Siamese algae eaters. But the thing about Siamese algae eaters is a lot of people mistake them for Chinese algae eaters, and that's a big mistake because Chinese algae eaters are super mean. Now, the downside to Siamese algae eaters, along with, well, any sort of algae eater with that in its name, is that they can get up to like a foot long, and then you're like, oh no, what do I do with this thing that I got for a little tank? So I fully admit that in this 20-gallon tall, I am renting one Chinese, Siamese algae eater. So other than that, the pH they want is right around 7.0. Neutral is pretty much where they need to be. They're not real tolerant to that. They're also not tolerant at all to nitrates or ammonia. And they're a little tolerant to nitrites is what they're not tolerant to. Nitrates, they can handle 30 or 40 parts per million. Okay, if you have a planted tank and you're fertilizing and things like that. But any higher than that, and you need to watch out because they can get sick and die. The other thing about them is they do have a bioload. They're not like shrimp. They do produce waste, and they actually produce quite a bit of waste, especially if they get to the size of a quarter or so. And there's several species of Nerite snails. There's zebra, tiger, olive, black racer Nerites, and then there's these horned ones. That first one I showed you was just a zebra Nerite. And basically, they come in all different colors and assorted patterns and things, and some of them are really beautiful, and try to get selectively bred ones from time to time, but they need that brackish water, so it's difficult to do at home. Now, they live about 2 years. They get the size of a quarter, and they really like soft algae, green algae, brown algae. They'll eat brown diatom spot algae, and they will eat the stuff that's on rocks that's hard to get to. Like, even with the scrub brush, I can't get that off very easily. It's an uphill battle, and because of that, that's why I have these guys in here. It's kind of a trifecta. With the shrimp I have, you've got a mono shrimp. I've also got Malawi shrimp, which do a good job of cleaning the water. And then I also have the Nerite snails, a Pleco for good measure to clean up around the bottom. But he does eat algae from time to time. I mean, he likes him some algae, but just specific types. You can't expect them to eat all your hair algae and stuff like that. The last thing that I would say is you don't want to keep them with pufferfish, loaches, crayfish, goldfish, cichlids, arowana. I mean, do I need to list the really big fish? I hope not. But essentially, they are a potential meal, and it goes the same with ram's horn snails or any other snail that you're keeping. If it fits in the mouth of a fish with strong jaws, it is a potential meal. So be careful there, especially with puffers. They eat snails for a living, basically. So I want to talk a little bit about the discovery of these. And it was back during British and European colonial rule of Africa. In the 1840s and 30s, there was kind of a rush on to both claim territory, but also this was before the big European rush to take over Africa. And it was more search parties and jolly good men from England trying to make a name for themselves, going deep into the jungle and bringing back tales of gorillas and elephants and all sorts of critters that people hadn't necessarily seen firsthand. And around this time, a man named Lovell Augustus Reeves started studying these creatures. He started studying snails, and he made friends with some of these adventurer types. He happened to be living in Rotterdam at the time, and he opened up a store for essentially the elite class. Let's take a look at one other tank and see if they're in sight at the moment. In my big tank, there are also some large ones in here that were in a video yesterday, but I have so many plants in this tank that it's hard to find them. So I think they're under there somewhere. So of course they're not cleaning the glass. They're cleaning the rocks, but the rocks need some cleaning. So this guy, Lovell Reeve, he's basically dealing in black market goods, things that were being taken out of territories that hadn't been properly decided on who was in control of. Obviously, the locals probably got nothing out of it. And he had these critters that he was trading, and he got really into snails. And I'm not saying he's a bad guy or anything. This is just how life was at the time. And in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, in London, Berlin, there was a craze in the mid-1800s to keep snails and fish. Now, snails happen to be a little bit hardier than fish in a lot of cases, especially if you have a freshwater creek or something and you have a way to heat your tank. So people really got into that and ended up making some pretty elaborate and beautiful fish tanks, honestly. And this Nerite snail here is an example of one of the ones that he named. So he names these snails in around 1843. He comes up with their scientific name. And just an interesting little tidbit while you guys are just watching the tank, and I'll try to get another picture if I can, if I figure out where he went, of the really pretty spiral one. There's a spiral zebra one with zigzag stripes on it. And if you guys are into aquariums, I'm sure you have seen what I'm talking about. So in 1843, this man publishes his first series of drawings discussing what he has discovered about all things in the conch world. And conch or conch, you think of the big shell creatures where you make the horn out of their shell. Something like Lord of the Flies, where they have to have it to talk or whatnot. That's where he started, was with some saltwater things. And then he moved his way into freshwater, local stuff, and then he started getting into the exotic things such as the giant African land snail and other critters around the world that people would bring to him and trade to him. And he would sketch them every day. And pretty soon, within a decade, he had 27,000 illustrations in this beautiful book. You can still find copies of it reprinted. Originals are worth a lot of money. And you know what's interesting is my killifish are down really low today and looking really beautiful. And so even though this was like a snail video, the snails are all hiding and the other fish are putting on a nice show for you. So I hope this is just a nice backdrop while I yak and talk about snails. So he was a naturalist trader in Rotterdam, then he goes to Cambridge. He gets bona fide, becomes a learned man, which back then kind of required money in a lot of cases rather than study, because professions oftentimes were more of hobbies and clubs where people met. He met up first by attending a club for people interested in mollusks, and that would be things like octopus and cuttlefish and things like that as well. Back then it included all of that, as well as sea cucumbers, things like that. But he narrowed it down to, at the time, what was called Algea iconita. So that is the name of the book, if you want to check it out, is Algea conita. So it's basically the illustration or study of shelled creatures and icon, so images. And they're all detailed figures that have information with them. Right now the sun's coming in, so you're seeing these gold ring danios just sparkle, and the Siamese algae eater in this tank sparkle. Siamese algae eater is a little bit mean, so I've got to keep an eye on him. But in any case, I just wanted to tell you that little story, a little bit of background. If you can get your hands on that book, or if you can find pictures from Algea iconita, then I highly recommend checking it out. I found a few pictures online and low quality scans, but I bet there's a nice rebound version of it somewhere, probably in Europe, that you could buy online or something along those lines. So this man was obsessed with keeping snails, and he is the one who popularized Nerite snails. He then brought them to dinner parties and things like that in the summer months, put them in ponds where they learned they died. They actually would heat their water, and very rich people would heat the water with either wood fire or constant water changes daily of warm water multiple times a day, which sounds like an incredible amount of work to me. But they were in these beautiful gilded cages and things like that. Gilded aquarium tanks, I should say. So this is a great little snail. Has an interesting little history. Just remember that it won't solve all your algae problems. It's pretty. You don't need a ton of them. You see a couple spots of algae like this up here. Don't dump 3 or 4 in. You only need 1 or 2 in a 20-gallon tank, 1 in a 10-gallon. And I wouldn't even keep them in a super small tank, because you can't manage the ammonia and the nitrates quite as effectively and specifically, which is very important for these critters to live a happy, healthy life. So that's what I have to tell you today about the Nerite snail, who doesn't want to cooperate for the video, but you're also getting to see some other cool fish in the moment too that will be moving out of this tank and going to the aquascaping contest this coming weekend with Dustin's Fish Tanks in town. I'm excited to meet the guy in person, and excited to just get together with a bunch of fish nerds and nerd out and scape. So thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, it means that you are more dedicated to watching fish nerds discuss stuff and a little bit of history and a lot of bit of rambling on my part. I'm learning the self-editing, but I appreciate y'all sticking with me. So take care of yourselves, your tanks, your fish, and swim on. Talk to you later. Bye.